I seem to have lost it. I think Tina asked me to come up here to talk because I was author of a report called Universal Basic Services that came out last year. So my title is, I am co-director of the Social Prosperity Network, which is a research network at the Institute for Global Prosperity at UCL in London. That's a heck of a mouthful. I'm not an academic. I work with Dame Henrietta Moore, who runs the Institute for Global Prosperity, and she likes to have people from civil society involved in every research project. So I am the civil society champion is part of this academic group at UCL. I think that one of the reasons that it's interesting for me to talk about this a little bit, and I don't know how much time do you want to give me?
10 minutes?
Okay. Is because we produced the report in October 2017. By February 2018, the largest left opposition party in the UK had adopted universal basic services as part of their platform. So in 5 months, it had touched some sort of political fuse. And I think that's not unintentional on our part. Right? I think, well, I'll speak for myself. I mean, I'm not interested in the academic reformatting of philosophical concepts unless it leads to a real and actual practical change. So what we were doing with this report was to try and tackle this problem, which is if you start to talk to people about what I would call proper harmony, the manifestation of public services in people's lives that is the physical embodiment of solidarity. And that this is what engenders, I think Tina's been talking about, does this lead then to political change? And I was really inspired by Charles's talk at the beginning of the conference about what they've been doing there, where they have exactly implemented a comprehensive set of public services, and they are seeing the political ramifications coming around from that. At least that's what I took from what I thought you were saying, Charles. So that's also been our experience in the UK with this report. So I will now just take a couple of minutes. So this is where the report's up there, and we're going to try and use this website as a way of continuing to communicate around this. So it's ubs-hub.org. So we looked at a justification for what belongs in the commons in terms of public services as our starting point. And it's beyond the concept of what is life-sustaining or what enables reproduction. But to add something that I think for many in the developed nations is kind of already a justification for some of their public service programs, which would be opportunity. This is the justification that adds education, typically, to a set of public services. To which we then added participation, on the grounds that if you want to live in a democracy and you believe in democracy, then everybody's got to participate in that. And I'll come back around to that, but I think it's really important how far back up this set of philosophical understandings you start. Because you have to have the right justifications in place to be able to make all of the arguments further down the line on this. So, including participation is a relatively simple jump that a lot of people can accept, and the consequences are broad. Because if you're going to say participation, then you have to enable connectivity. Internet becomes a right that flows out of that. In our report, we tried to solidify the concept of universal public services, and I'll come back to the word universal in a bit, because we were riffing off universal basic income as a way of kind of engendering that. But we defined 7 basic services. So there's access to shelter and food. This is what I would call basic life-sustaining stuff. Then there is healthcare and education, which is much more about the opportunity stuff. And then to which we added information and transport, which we would consider to be the participation pieces. The seventh service is, we would call legal services, but it's everything to do with protection and the infrastructure of democracy, the ability to vote, the police force. There's a bunch of legal aid, there's a bunch of services that are necessary in a society that we put in that, so not to ignore them. And what we wanted to do was address the question where if we say, okay, we want to give universal access to that set of 7 services, most people's reactions were that it's pie in the sky and can't possibly afford to do that, what are you talking about? And our sense was that that wasn't true, and sure enough the report shows that to expand the UK, where admittedly we already provide full healthcare service, which at about 9% of GDP, but to add in we got very extensive, we did, for our country anyway, 1.5 million social housing units delivered rent-free with a full utilities allowance, no local tax. It's just a way of defining, like, how big, can you imagine the sort of nice, a really nice meaty version of this public service that would transform your society? Then let's cost that and be able to say it's achievable. And so 1.5 million houses, all rent-free. 1.8 billion meals for the food insecure. So the survey in the UK, which will tell you about 8% of the population goes without a meal once in the year, and so we tackled that. Free bus services for everybody in the country. And free internet access, basic cell phone contracts. I mean, it's a pretty comprehensive thing. So it comes out at 2% of GDP, which is certainly within the range of achievable for UK society. And so that's really what our objective was in the report, was to say, you think this is too expensive, it's not. It's achievable. Now, I want to caveat a couple of things about that report. So that was our objective. Whether or, the actual means of distribution of these commons is not what we had the time to do in this report. If you built 1.5 million social houses, as someone critic said to us on day 2, was, well, what about the next one person beyond that, where they have to pay rent and commercial for them? You're sort of missing the point. The point of the report was to say, okay, look, if we tackled this, there are definitely distribution issues that we haven't tackled in that report. The second point that I make is our use of universal. One of the features of a service, we believe, that gives it a real advantage is that you can give universal access, but the cost of delivering the service is only for the service users. So everybody in the UK has the right to a wheelchair, it's part of National Healthcare Service. But most people don't have them. You can give everybody in the country a free bus pass, but the people who use it are the ones that need to travel. So your cost of delivering the service is not the same as it would be if you said, well, we're going to give a universal benefit in the form of cash, which then means £5 to every person every X whatever your period is. So there are efficiencies that come with services that we want to leverage and we think that belong to the society. The word universal, therefore, is very specifically universal access. It has been, people get a little bit caught up on our use of universal in this, I just wanted to make that point. Seeing as there was macroeconomics mentioned in the front end of this little session, I'll make a couple of macroeconomic points because we were slightly sort of macroeconomic focused in this report as well. If you look at the highest taxing countries in the world and you average them out, it comes to about 42% of GDP. That is the total percentage of the economy that is captured by the government and respent by them in one form or another. So if you're going back to your particular environment and someone says, well, we can or can't afford this, that's a number to keep in mind. There are plenty of countries in this world that are raising 41% of their GDP and using it for social purposes. So if your country isn't there yet, you can very confidently say, no, we can get there. It's not the end of this. Now, obviously, different countries at different points in the development cycle, you may want to factor that in, but just as a philosophical macroeconomic point, you can get up into the low 40s even with very large and diverse societies. In the global north or in the developed countries, about 85% of what the government does is social services, is effectively funding the commons. So this is a very political point. I know that sometimes it looks like politics is about these sort of philosophical things, and it is, but in the end, what the politicians control is the fiscal resources that are raised from taxes in the rest of the country. And keep in mind that the vast majority of what they're spending that on in most countries is back into these social public services. So I don't think you can. This is political. I think that the one final point that I'll make is back to this point at the beginning about how you justify these services and what you do. And sitting here listening to the talks here, I'm struck that, and so it's a new thought, so I welcome any feedback or criticism on any of this, and I may have got this wrong, but my sense is that there is an opportunity to sort of commons the justification. That if your justifications for things stem from, and it's not to denigrate them, and they do have power, right, but from individualistic rights, it becomes a longer stretch to take that individualistic right and use it as a justification for a social commons. But when you take a justification like participation, that I see the benefit of participation is to the whole society. Because we live in a democracy, we want educated voters, and we want people to be connected to information, and we want them to make informed decisions. These are benefits that accrue to the commons in terms of the public. So I think that there's possibly something there that would be interesting to think about more, about whether, if you're finding difficulty going and getting the intention of government or other bodies for these kinds of programs of public services, that we should pay some attention to the justifications we're using, because it's possible that a more commons justification will be an easier accept for a commons solution. And I think that's enough.
Perfect.